Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you how you can create this simple error trigger that you can reuse across all of your workflows to notify you both via email that you've got an error in any of your workflows, as well as log the error message in a Google Sheet. In this case, we're using a Google Sheet, but you could use an N8N data table or any other kind of database. The process remains the same. And we are also going to look at 5 other ways that you can handle errors and be production ready in any of your N8N workflows. And so without further ado, let's jump right in. So before I show you the examples, I just wanted to quickly talk to you about what being production ready or having production ready error handling systems actually involve. Right. So when people think of production ready, they may often think that it's about making sure your workflows never have errors, or maybe that they just operate faster or are more efficient and they are basically optimized for cost. But that's not necessarily true, because inevitably your workflows are going to error. There are always going to be, say, API changes, rate limits, servers are going to be down, something or the other is going to come up. And so what you want to be able to do is build, say, guardrails or systems around your workflows, so that even if there are errors that are out of your control, say the chat GPT model you're using or any other API service you're using is down, then it shouldn't be that your workflow comes to a standstill, right? So firstly, what you want to do whenever an error occurs is you need to have some kind of logging mechanism. Now, in this case, we're going to be using Google Sheets, but otherwise you could use an N8N data table, any other database, so that you basically have a record of whatever error has just happened. The next thing you want to do is have some sort of escalation so that you are notified that this workflow has errored, and then you can go in and debug and see what's wrong. And then the third, fourth, and fifth are basically you want to make sure that your workflow doesn't completely break. You want to have some sort of retry logic, like in examples wherein the server might have been down for just a couple of minutes, or maybe you ran into a rate limit issue. Again, these are more like time bound errors. It's kind of like you're just banned from, say, accessing a resource. Maybe if you have been accessing it too much, like you've been hitting an API endpoint. Most robust online API systems and backend systems have rate limiting implemented so that no single client can overuse them and hog bandwidth. So another example of doing that is you also want to have graceful error handling and not have any malicious or disastrous side effects that happen as a result of your workflow erroring. And an example of that is, just because your workflow may run into an error, it's not that it crashes and it sends like 100 emails and spams your clients or spams them with random invoices. Like if you were building an invoice management system, it shouldn't also randomly delete any data, right? Because data is sensitive and you just don't want it deleted because of an error in your workflow. So these are like various different cases to handle. We're going to look at a few examples here, but the mindset that you need to take away from this is that yes, your errors are eventually going to error. At some point, sooner or later, they're going to error. So then how do you, one, gracefully handle them so that it doesn't break anything? There's no like disastrous side effects. You want to implement some sort of logging, and you want to have some level of escalation, which is notifying you via Gmail, Slack, or some other platform so that you know it's error and then you can come in and rectify it. Okay, so that's enough theoretical knowledge about error handling. Now let's look at the examples. So first we're going to set up this error trigger. So even if I just show you what we're going to be covering. So first we're going to be covering error workflows and using error triggers. Then we're going to look at fallback LLMs and models. Then we're going to look at retry on failure. Then we're going to look at continue on error with error output. And last, I'm also going to briefly talk to you about input sanitization. Okay, so in our first example, we're going to be looking at this error workflow, and we're going to use an error trigger, which is a sub workflow that we create. If you don't know what that means, I'm going to explain it to you right now. So first, we're going to create a completely new workflow from scratch. Okay, now if I come in here and I just enter error trigger, all we need to do is add this error trigger node. It's that simple. We don't need to do any configuration. And all we need to do is just create these connections. Now, in this case, I want to use Gmail and Google Sheets. Like I wanted to log it in Google Sheets. You may choose to do it in an N8N data table or a database. That is completely up to you. So this is what I want to use for my logging, and this is what I want to use for my escalation or notification. So then I come in here, I just choose my Gmail account, just choose who I'm sending it to, what subject, and a simple message. So I've just added this in. And basically, you can see in here, we have these two basically variables or parameters. One is the JSON execution error message, and the other is the execution URL. So basically, whenever any of our workflows error, right, they break for whatever reason, this error trigger will catch all of those errors, and it will tell you why it has errored in this message field, and it will tell you what the URL of your workflow that it errored in, and then that helps you in being able to debug it faster, right? So let's look at an example of this. So in our error logs, okay, I'm just going to delete this row so that you can see it in action. And right now, if I come into this error trigger, right, I just hit save. We've just set up our Gmail node, and our Google Sheets is pretty much the same. We've connected it to this error logs Google Sheet. We just have three simple columns with the timestamp, the error message, and the URL, right? So this json.execution.error.message, which is the same one we looked at in our Gmail node, and the json.execution.url, both of these are going to come from the error trigger, right? So let me show this to you in action. So if I come in here and I just click execute workflow, basically whenever this error trigger is called, you're going to see the output of this is going to have a URL, and it's going to have this error.message field, right? So if we want to see it in JSON, you can visualize it here as well. So we see this json.execution.url, which is the workflow that errored, and we see a json.execution.error.message, which has the exact message. Now in this case, it was just an example error message. So that's why if I come back into my logs, you can see that we have this example error message. And if I come into my Gmail, we will see that we've got this email message saying your workflow has errored, and this is the example error message, and this is the URL that triggered the error. So once we have this error trigger set up, we can use this to catch any errors in any of our workflows. It's really that simple, right? And for whatever reason, any of our other workflows may error, all that's going to change is this URL, like which workflow did the error originate in, and the message is going to change. And then we will have that in our Google Sheets logged, and we will also get an email about it. So let me now show this to you in action. Okay, so how do we set this up is first, now in my say current workflow, I have this AI agent that's just connected to a chat model. It's stupidly simple. We've connected our chat trigger node. And now what I want to do is if I come up in here, okay, for this workflow, basically, if I click on the three dots and I go to settings, it will show me this error workflow to notify when this errors. And all I have to do is select this error trigger, which is the name of this workflow that I've created, which has a simple error trigger node and this Gmail and Google Sheets for notification, escalation, and logging, right? And basically any error that happens in this entire workflow will then get logged in our Google Sheet as well as in Gmail. So let me show this to you in action. So if I was to come into our chat node, I'm just going to copy this URL so that we can see the chat live. And now if I drag this over, I'm going to say, hi, can you tell me a joke? Okay, so it's thinking and it says, why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Perfect. So our AI agent is working as expected, right? Now, say for some reason the credentials inside our AI model had expired or they were invalid, right? Like I think this one is no longer valid. Or let me try this one actually. So now if I save this workflow and I say, can you try that again? Can you see it says error authorization failed? Please check your credentials. And that's because the credentials I have in here were no longer valid. So now say for some reason our tokens had expired, the key was wrong, whatever that is, right? There is every possibility that maybe we've just used the wrong credentials. So how do we get notified about it, right? Because we've connected our error trigger inside these error settings. So inside these workflow settings, we've connected our error trigger. Our error trigger will then fire, and then we will see the message in these logs as well as a Gmail notification. Now, in that example, when we were checking our error logs as well as Gmail, we see that the error didn't show up. And that's because of a setting inside this agent, which was on error. We had initially set it to continue. By we, I mean me. I had accidentally set this to continue. What we wanted to do is make sure that this is set to stop workflow. And now if I save this, okay, we still have our invalid credentials set up in here. So now if I come up here to this chat and I ask it, say, can you tell me a joke? It's going to say error in workflow. But now if I check my logs, now we can see that it's added this new error for authorization failed. Please check your credentials. And we've also got our email notification saying that our workflow has error. So this was the first level of how do you connect an error trigger to any of your workflows. And I think even if you just take this away from this entire lesson, that's more than sufficient to make sure that like you've added some level of error handling to your workflows, and you will be notified about them, they will be logged, and you'll be able to see what the exact error message is. like we can see in here, it says authorization failed, please check your credentials. So we know that it's most likely that yes, our authorization has failed. There's probably an issue with our model and our credentials. So then we can come into this workflow. Like if we click in here, it will show you the executions and it will show you why it has error, right? So if we just let this load, you can see that it shows you the error. The entire workflow is loading and it will show you where exactly. It says problem in node AI agent 2 authorization failed, please check your credentials. So that's our AI agent 2 authorization failed, please check your credentials. And that's basically how you can debug your workflow. And then like now, if we were to come in here, we would just come into the editor tab. And now if I make sure that we are using the right credentials, I'm just going to change that, hit save on our workflow, come back to our chat and say, can you tell me a joke? Now it's going to tell us a joke. So that's how you can debug using an error trigger, come in, fix any errors that you may have run into in any of your workflows. And yep, that was the first section of how do you use the error workflow. Next up, we're going to look at using fallback LLMs or fallback AI models. And so now in our same example, I'm just going to take our chat trigger, remove it from there, connect it to this AI agent. I also want to make sure that our error for now is set to stop workflow. And if we have this saved, now in this example, what we're going to look at is I'm going to remove this and show you how we set this up from scratch. So in this case, again, we have our invalid credentials set up in here. So if I save this workflow, this is our AI agent 4. Okay, so we've saved our workflow. If I come in here, copy this URL, set up our chat, and now if I ask it, can you tell me a joke? I would expect to see an error. Okay, so we see our error in workflow. We see that, okay, now we're getting a different error. Say it says a fallback node. It says a fallback model subnode must be connected and enabled. Now, why are we seeing that error for this workflow? Is because if I come into this AI agent, I have this enable fallback model set up, but I haven't connected one yet. So first, I'm just going to disable it. Okay, save this. And now if we come back into our workflow, I'm going to ask it to tell me a joke again. It says error in workflow. This time it says traditional error, authorization failed because we have invalid credentials, right? So now what we can do, a different way of solving this invalid credentials problem is to enable a fallback model. So basically, if this first model we were trying to use, in this case, it's the OpenAI chat model, if that failed for whatever reason, we can have, say, a backup in there. So now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to choose, say, the open router, and I am going to choose, say, Claude, the haiku model. Okay, so I'm going to come in and save this. Okay, and now what we're going to see is because we've connected like a fallback or a backup model, is even though our OpenAI chat model will fail because we have invalid credentials, our open router chat model using Claude is automatically going to take over. So let me look at that right now. So if I copy this message in, hit paste again, and hit send, now you can see we get a joke again. And if we come into this and we check our executions, so in our most recent execution, you can see in here that our OpenAI chat model failed, but our Open Router chat model succeeded, right? And that's how you can make sure that by adding some robustness to your AI agents, by connecting a fallback LLM or model, that there's less likely of your workflows to error. Maybe your credits have expired, the token is invalid, whatever that may be. So this is another way you can better handle errors in your workflows. Okay, so now if I come back to our workflow, next up, I wanted to talk to you about the retry on failure. This is basically just a setting that pretty much every node in N8N has. You can see that if we come up to the settings, you can just enter this retry on fail, toggle the switch on. So when it's off, it looks like this. But when you toggle it on, you can set a maximum number of times you want this node to retry, like its functionality, and how long do you want it to wait in between. Now, this time is in milliseconds. So if you wanted it to be 1 second, it would be 1000. And like if you wanted 10 seconds, it would be 10,000 and so on. So this is just, again, a level of robustness you can add to all of your nodes, not just to your AI agents. And that is completely up to you if you want it to retry or not. Okay, so that was just briefly like how do you implement a retry on failure. Another way you can add robustness is using this continue on error setting that we're going to look at now inside, say, our AI agents. But this setting is available to all nodes and modules inside N8N as well. So if we come up in here, we can see this on error by default is usually set to stop workflow. Now in our example, we're going to look at how do we continue so that even if our workflow errors, like we will still send a message just saying that our workflow has completed. So if you come in here and you see that we're sending it to my email account and we're just saying your workflow was completed, right? So now if we just connect our chat trigger node, I'm just going to drag this over to move it from that agent, connect it to this one. Okay, so now we have our chat trigger node set up here. And if I check our AI model, this is our invalid credential account. So if I come back to our chat model, and actually just let me start that again. So if I copy this, come into a new tab, this is our chat model. So I would say, can you tell me a joke? Now we expect it to error, okay, because we have invalid credentials. But now what will happen is we get some sort of response. I mean, this response is basically just because it has continued execution and it has sent our email. So now, like what we saw in the first case when I had mistakenly set up our module, is now that we have on error as continue, we are not going to see the latest error. This is an old error, right? This is an old error, right? So we're not going to see the most recent error, even though that our credentials were invalid. And so if I come back in here to our workflow and I see the output of our AI agent, it doesn't have any output and it just says execution will continue even if this node fails. So, and then what ends up happening is it just sends this Gmail message to us. So if I come in here and I go back to my inbox, you can see these were the old emails, but here you can see that our workflow has now completed, right? Even though there was an error in our workflow. And just to show you that we wouldn't see this error if we didn't have the on continue setup. So if I come in here and if I was to enter stop workflow, hit save. Now our latest error was this one, okay, at 12:17. Now, if I come back into our chat node, I hit, can you tell me a joke? We see the error in workflow, but this time you can see that we have a new error in here now at 12:24. We do not see a new workflow completed email, but we see the workflow has just error email, which comes again from our error trigger. Like, I hope that wasn't too confusing, but basically, yeah, if you want your workflows or any of your nodes to continue on error, you basically just need to come in here to the settings and say continue on error. But if you wanted to stop the workflow, you would stop it and then log the error in your Google Sheets or Gmail using the error trigger node. So that was basically how we use the continue on error. Next, we're going to look at how do we use the continue on error with error output. Okay, so now I'm just going to connect our chat trigger to our new AI agent. Now, the only difference between the previous example and this one is if I come into the settings here, so we've looked at stop workflow, we've looked at continue on error. Now we're going to look at continue using error output. So the difference is here, if I scroll up, this AI agent just has one output field, right? That it will blindly do this one thing, even if this AI agent or this node fails. The difference with the with error output is it has two branches that emerge out of this possibly erroring node, which is a success node and an error node. So the success node, we may want to say like, okay, your workflow was completed. But in our error node, we may want to say that, okay, your workflow was completed, but there were errors. And so like this, what we can do is enable different kinds of conditional logic so that like, yeah, if everything is good, we want to go down one route. If everything didn't work, then we want to go down the second route. So let me show you that in action as well. So if I come in here and check our AI model, so again, we have our invalid account credentials set up. I am going to just save this workflow, close the old chat, come in here, just start a new one. And now if I say, can you tell me a joke, and hit enter, you're going to see that in this case, what has happened is our AI agent has errored. But if I come back into our workflow and I check our executions, so our latest one was at 12:27. So if I come in here and look at our executions, you will see what has happened is we received the chat message, the credentials failed, and because there was an error, this email was sent, right? So we expect to see this, your workflow was completed, but there were errors. And if I come in here, you can see that we have this workflow was completed, but with errors, right? So that was our subsequent email that we were sending when we went down this route, right? And if everything was okay, so say we change the credentials in this model. If I come back to our editor tab and I just use the correct credentials, I hit save, and now I ask it for this message. We are also going to see that if I come back in here or check our executions, that we that our agent succeeded. We got the response from the model. So let us check our AI agent output. So it says, sure, here's a joke for you. And it tells us the joke. And then it goes on to the success route, and it actually goes on to send the Gmail email. So if I come back in here and I hit refresh, now we get our success message just saying pretty much that our workflow was completed. So that is basically like how you can add conditional logic to your error handling. So you can have one route for success, one route for failure. And the last part that I wanted to talk to you about, which is not super important, but they do add an additional level of robustness to your workflows, and that is input sanitization. Okay, so inside this input sanitization, and this basically just means like usually when you're working with a lot of these workflows and automations, some APIs, some parts of your workflows may expect different data types, and you may end up providing a second type of data type. So let us look at an example. Like here, if I just manually execute this trigger, if I come in here and just say execute workflow, you can see we have this code node. If I come in here to this code node, we'll ignore the errors for now. But basically, I have a code node that returns a list of items with a name and a score. Okay, so let me first show you this working before we show you the errors. So all I'm doing is from our code node is I'm returning this array of items, which has 3 names and 3 scores. As you can see here, Adrian, Jason, Kevin, scores are 10, 100, and 95. So if I execute this workflow, you can see everything's good, right? We're just using a simple edit fields to set the values, right? We can see the score, the name, and for all 3 objects. Okay, so now say for an example, we had a pair of additional double quotes around the 10, right? And we just hit save and we execute this workflow. You will see we're getting an error. It says that score expects a number, but we got 10, like it's basically getting this value as a string, right? Because it's indicated with the double quotes. Now, this is basically pretty much like the most common types of input sanitization errors and data verification that we get, which is kind of like sometimes our node may expect an array, but we may give it a JSON. Sometimes it may get a JSON, but or vice versa, right? Sometimes it may expect JSON, but we give it an array, or it expects an array and we give it a JSON. Similarly, sometimes they may expect strings, but we give it numbers, and sometimes they may expect numbers, but we give it a string. These are some of the more common ones. But if we come back to our workflow, like in this example, score is supposed to be a number and name is supposed to be a string. But what's happening is score is being received as a string because of these additional double quotes around it, right? So how can we fix it is like one easy way of fixing strings to numbers is to use this function called json.pass. So if I come in here, you can see we have this json.pass, and this will basically make sure that any string, if it is ever received, is converted to a number. So if I hit save, and now if I execute this workflow, you can see that we have our 3 numbers of 10, 100, and 95, and we have the correct names in there. So similarly, sometimes it may happen that you want to go from number to string, and in that case, if you wanted to go from number to string, what you would do is instead of using the json.pass function, you would use a json.stringify function. So if I came in here and I made this json.stringify, and now I changed these inputs from being, say, strings, and I just had them as numbers. Okay, so I basically removed the quotes to indicate that they are all numbers. I just hit save. And now if I execute my workflow, you can see that we've converted them from, okay, we forgot to change our type in here, but like if we change it to string, and now if I hit execute workflow, you can see that it has succeeded. And then we have converted our data types or our objects from numbers to strings. Like this is a more nuanced application. You don't need to completely know this, but it's always nice to keep at the back of your mind that if you ever run into type conversion errors from string to numbers or numbers to string, you usually need to use the json.pass or the json.stringify based on, like, if you want a string, use the stringify. If you want a number, use the pass. Or even if you wanted to go from like a string to an object, you would use the json.pass. I don't want to confuse you too much. You can always learn this like on a as you need it basis, like if you ever run into this error. But like I mentioned, it's just something for you to keep in your back pocket if you ever need it, and it doesn't feel like completely strange to you. So that was, in like summary, the 6 most common types of ways of dealing with errors. To be honest, like if you just have an error trigger, that's more than sufficient for most of your workflows. It's always good to have a fallback LLM. It takes like a minute, less than a minute to set up. And based on your applications, you can either use the continue on error with error output so that you have conditional branching logic. And you can always just include the retry on failure, again, just as a backup fallback mechanism. It takes like 2 seconds to set up. You just need to change the settings inside nodes that you think may most likely error. So I hope you learned a lot in this video. As always, like this part around error handling can get a little tricky, especially if you are new to AI and automation. So I would suggest keeping it simple. Just use the error trigger for now. Don't get too confused with all the others. And yep, if you want access to this entire template, it will be inside our Skool community. As always, I really appreciate you staying till the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.